Hey guys, it's Barrett with the Gimme Camper. So today we're down here at Shelburne RV. They're sponsoring this video. This is a video we're going to make about routine maintenance on the camper. Specifically, we're getting ready to go to Yellowstone from Tennessee. So I wanted everything to be in tip-top shape. So I asked Steve here if he could help me out. We can do a video on packing the wheel bearings of the camper, as well as just doing a checkup on our brakes here. So I'm going to let him talk to you a little bit.
So one of the conversations I had with Barrett when he came in this morning was, what are you running your brake gain at right now? And right now Barrett's at about 10. So obviously, being as high as it is, we want to look at obviously making sure that the brakes are adjusted correctly. He's been on several trips, and of course we've had several miles on this camper. He did have an axle that had a problem on the rear that's been replaced under OEM. So we want to look at obviously adjustment, making sure everything's greased correctly, and that way he doesn't have no trouble going down the road. So first thing we want to look at is obviously he's got his gain set high. So one thing I'm going to do to start out with is we're going to pull one of the drums down, and primarily on the axle that's the oldest, and do a visual inspection. So I really want to see, do we have a lot of dust in the drums? Or we got grease coming through the grease seals on the back? Just a general maintenance look at that, just to make sure that we don't have something that could possibly be a failure or a reason why we don't have any brakes. So once we get that drum off, if everything looks good and we've got normal wear on the magnets, the drums, the shoes, everything's been broke in correctly and it looks good, then we're going to put all that back together and then go through a wheel adjustment on there and make sure we got the drum set correctly. Now, obviously, when people come in and want to know about brakes, gain is one of the first things I ask about, because if your brakes are working correctly, I want to see between 3 and 5 volts. Anything over 7 volts, I'm concerned at whether or not we've got actual brakes working. So obviously adjustment being one, magnet being another problem, connectivity to the truck. Most trucks nowadays are pretty smart, and they're going to tell you if you are not connected. Some of the older trucks, we actually use a 95 model Dodge to move the campers around here, and so I've got one of the newer controllers that will tell me pretty much immediately once we plug up to the camper whether it's connected or if there's an issue going on there. So some of the older controllers don't do that. All the newer controllers basically on all the new trucks will pretty much tell you if there's a continuity problem in the wiring or if the truck's not connected. So we want to look at all that, make sure that are adjusted right and everything looks good.
And what would you say, any pointers on like DIY versus having this professionally done?
Well, the biggest thing is, again, just make sure, one, that everything is adjusted correctly. And then, Barrett made a good comment to me a few minutes ago about how do we know that the bearings are, if we got the castle nut on too tight or too loose or whatever. The way the castle nut's made, there's only certain places a lot of times, especially ones that have carter pins in it, that you can put that in place. So obviously if you over tighten that and put the carter pin in, the load on that bearing is going to be really, really tight, and it obviously could fail or build a lot of heat and fail. So there's only certain places you can put that. Typically on some of the LCI axles, they have a nut that goes on top of the castle nut that you can actually rotate to put the pin in that holds everything. I'm not sure which one we got on this one. We'll get into that in a minute. But usually you want to have just a little bit of sideways lash, not a lot, just a little bit in that bearing to get the load right, to make sure that it's going to not overheat or problems. Being too tight obviously is an extreme problem. Being way too loose, then the tire's going down the road and it's moving on you, and it can cause problems. So the biggest thing is it really comes down to a little bit of common sense. When you put it on there, if it feels too tight, back it off. If it's too loose, you're going to know right away with the tire on there that it's too loose, and you may not feel comfortable with that. But when you go to tighten it back up, there's kind of a fine line in there, and you've just got to kind of find that appropriate line where it's not too tight, not too loose.
And then you said you've had some customers, and I've been in this situation when I had that axle replaced, that we figure out real quick whenever we go hook up. I had mine done, you know, by the warranty, and so I was at another dealership, but nobody told me about it. And I go get in the truck, and all of a sudden I don't have any trailer brakes when they just replaced the axle. So what's going on?
Well, and LCI actually has a break-in procedure for new drum and shoes, and basically what they want is in the first 200 miles you need to set your gain to 10, and then as you're coming to a red light, you get up to about 30 miles an hour, they want you to reach over and pull the emergency portion of the brake, the little lever on your truck that goes from 0 to 10 or 12, and they want you to pull that over, which sends full braking power to the rear brakes. And so basically what happens is over a period of 200 miles at stoplights, red lights, stuff like that, you just want to use the trailer to help brake. You don't want to use the vehicle to help brake. You want to reach over there and pull your gain control all the way over, and then that will allow the 100% of the brakes to be at the trailer. And so from 30 to about 10 miles an hour each time you go to brake over a period of 200 miles per LCI's break-in procedure, that will actually varnish the brakes in and get everything seated and does what it needs to do. And then after that 200 or so miles, then they want you to go in there and readjust the brakes to the proper adjustment, and that should get you the proper braking. And so we've had several customers obviously leave out of here, as Barrett found out where he had his done, that were frustrated because they didn't have any brakes. And so we always try to hand that break-in procedure to that customer and go, listen, they're adjusted up correctly at this point, but there is a point where you have to do that break-in procedure, and it has to be broke in and then readjusted. That's very, very particular. I have seen that even in my own, and I'm very particular about brakes, but I have seen that in my own equipment trailers where I put new brakes and drums in there, and it's about 200 miles, and then you got to go in and readjust. And once you readjust, and I'm usually within 3 to 5 volts on my gain control. So I will say, Barrett, there's one thing for years that when I was doing brakes and needing a good impact, I looked around, and I had an electric impact for years. And I actually did a lot of research, and I went over to Harbor Freight and bought the Earthquake XT 20 volt impact. And I'm not a huge Harbor Freight fan when it comes to some of their cordless equipment, but I will tell you this impact, and this one's got the little longer anvil on the front of it, but I will tell you, as far as breaking stuff loose, I've been very, very impressed. It's been very, very durable, very good quality. It has taken off any wheel other than big semi-truck stuff, but anything on a camper that we've hit on, I don't know the exact torques on it, but it is way up there, and I've been very pleased with it. So shout out to Harbor Freight on their impact.
I have an Earthquake mirror model.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. All right, yeah, done.
So what happens when you just go to town and throw a whole bunch of grease in one of those gadgets?
So obviously at a certain point, the grease, and you can tell that one's got, if we look at this cap right here, and I've damaged that, so we'll have to get a new cap, but that one was really on there. But let's see how much grease is in that. At some point, that grease has got to go somewhere. So once, like I was telling you, what I normally do is when I grease through the hubs, once I see it coming through the bearing face, I stop. Once you start pushing grease there, what happens if that grease gets to the end of there? It's got to go somewhere. So where's the somewhere? Usually it starts pushing through the brakes into the back of the shoe plates, the backing plates. So that's a lot of grease for me. I would not, normally don't grease that heavy. That's.
What happens when you get grease on your brake pad?
Well, stoppy. And that could be a problem. So there's obviously quite a bit of grease in this one. So we're gonna definitely go a little further in here and make sure we got everything we haven't started pushing grease all the way back. Now this was the retainer I was talking about that some of them have. A lot of them have a Carter pin in there, but this one here has a different type of retainer, which is good because now you can adjust those brakes. You're not dependent on the castle nut to have to line up all the way and have to throw a pin through it. This one here, because of the notch on the side of the spindle, this will allow you, and this clips over the side of the castle nut right there, and so that'll allow you to get a little bit closer and then put that lock on there to hold it in place. These are a little bit, I like these a little better because it gives me, I can get that lash that I want, where some of them, if they have a castle nut in there and you have to stick a Carter pin through there, you're either one side of the castle nut or the other side of the castle nut, and sometimes that can be a little bit too tight. So I definitely like this option a little better because it gives me the ability to kind of fine tweak it to what I want. And you see how tight that nut was right there.
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't take, those bearings have to float inside there, and that load has to be just right. So usually you don't want to have to take those off with a pair of pliers or anything like that. Socket, they should come off pretty simple. So looking at this drum, we've taken the drum off, and you can see we've got a fair amount of dust in there. So we're obviously at a point where I feel like you're starting to see you've got some wear in the drum, which is good. So we should be seated good. We don't have any excessive wear in the magnet where the magnet rides on the face. So, and we don't have any grease. We got a little bit right there, and we're going to clean that off, but we don't have anything inside the drum or inside the shoes, and we're going to take a good look at that and see. But I'm not seeing any other grease. You can see where the grease has stopped here, but we don't have a lot. We have a little bit that has started coming through right there. So we're going to clean all that out, make sure that's good. We're looking at the magnet face. We want to make sure all that's good and no excessive wear. Look at the drums and make sure that the drums don't have an excessive wear, but usually if you have excessive wear there, you're going to see it in the drum face. So the biggest thing I'm doing is I'm just going to do a lot of cleaning here and make sure that looks like I use a lot of rags, and sometimes we do, but I just want to make sure we don't have anything that's going to get in there grease wise to cause problems on the, you see how much grease come right off that spindle. So that's all stuff that's gotten past that seal. So we just want to make sure everything's cleaned up and we don't have anything that's going to get in there and get slick on the end of those, on those drums at all, or on the face of those shoes. I will probably bring out my air hose, Barrett, and we'll get a little bit of that blowed out of there and make sure it's all clean. Go ahead and wrap that up so we can protect that. We don't want to get too much dirt and nasty stuff in here when we go to blowing this out of here. All right, so one other thing that I always do after I blow that out, Barrett, is I'm going to make sure to put a little bit of grease, because this hole right here is where the grease comes through the spindle. So now that I've blown a lot of dust and stuff in there, I don't want to get no debris or anything that's going to damage the bearings. So usually what I'll do, and you can see how that, see how that nasty end come out of there. So we just want to make sure that we've got fresh. We don't want to push. That could be damaging, obviously, to the race over a period of time. So we want to make sure we push a little bit of that through there just to make sure we don't have no problems. So now we got good clean grease coming through there, so I am good with that. Just want to make sure we don't have nothing, just to make sure we don't have no trash in there. Could be detrimental to the bearing. So one thing else I always do too, Barrett, while I have these off, I'm just going to go ahead and clean. I'm going to go ahead and clean these races off, and the reason I'm telling you this is because this is going to tell me a little bit of a story of what's going on with these races right here. And so the biggest thing is, I want to see uneven wear. Do we have any pitting? Do we have anything where it's wearing on one side or the other? I'm just really looking to see if there's something. Is the race bent? Is there an issue that possibly could come up where this bearing could fail? So the biggest thing is I'm just inspecting this bearing just to verify, to see what's going on. Now the backside is a little different because I'd have to break the seal out and do all that. But the thing is, if we've got some really bad wear there, the reality of it is that drum's going to be in a little bit of a bind, which is probably going to cause issues there. So if I'm looking here and I see issues in the roller assembly or scuffs or marks, I'm going to change all of them anyways. I'm not going to just change one. So I'm really just looking to see if I'm seeing any kind of uneven wear or anything that looks abnormal to me. And I'll tell you, these bearings actually are really look good. There's no uneven wear on the rollers. You'll get some where the ends will have a little bit more wear than the center, but these actually look really good. So I'm not seeing anything that's really jumping out at me. So we're going to go ahead and roll on with those. We definitely need to clean that seal off back there, because obviously we've had some trash that's pushed through there. Some grease and other stuff has built up there, so I want to make sure to get all that. And I know we use a lot of paper towels, but got to make sure this is getting clean good. Dust and some stuff there, so we're just going to make sure we clean that. Notice I was just staying on the drum, not getting anything close to the center there, and I went ahead and packed that full. Make sure we don't get nothing in there. I'm good at this point. Let's go ahead and get that reseated on there. Now we got plenty of grease on that spindle and in that hub. So if we were putting new drums on there, I would hand pack that bearing. But since we've got so much grease still in there that we're dealing with. Now those can be tricky to get in sometimes because that tight tolerance. Don't use a hammer or nothing like that to drive them in. If they get hung up as you go in, you're going to pull the drum back off and then try to work it in there. You should be able to, you saw me work that in there by hand. But if it does get hung up, you obviously want to pull the drum back off to get that bearing out of there and then get that back on there. But yeah, those can be a little tricky sometimes. Should go on right just like that by hand. Now obviously too tight is a problem, so I've got that on there where it's pretty snug, but I'm going to back that off just a little bit, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to put the lock on it, Barrett, and then I'm going to at this point go ahead and put the wheel back on it, and we want to check lash that way so I can see what we got. So I'm going to start with that, and you can see that castle nut, this lock and all holds that in place, which has to be just in the right location sometimes. So that's our tight spot right there. Really want to back that off just a little bit, but we got to make sure this lock is going to work where it needs to. Okay, went on there. We got a little bit of, see how we got a little bit of lash going on right there. Everything spins good. Now you can hear the noise there. You can hear that drum's not really touching right there. So what I'm going to do is we're actually going to get down here and I'm going to go ahead and adjust it right now, because two things I want to do. Once I put the wheel back on, again, we want to check that lash. If we need to tighten this or loosen that, that's the time we're going to do that, because I'm not really getting a lot of play right there. Once I get the wheel on, I'll be able to see what we got. And then two, I'm going to go ahead and adjust it now because I can reach it. And then once we get the wheel on, we'll retest it. And if I need to move the jack and then crawl underneath there and readjust it some more, we're going to do that. But I'm going to try to keep from. Now, of course, there's my spoon that I use. This is actually a KD brand. I like it because it's got a little bit more of a point to it. Obviously, it's got a curve, so that way we can get in there around the axle and do that. I've got some other ones that aren't really pointy on there, and sometimes if they're stuck, it makes it a little bit of a pain to try to grab that adjuster. But the KD brand's the one I use, the one I like. I've had it for years, so that's what I've been using. Obviously, we need to make sure our jack is good, and probably would be good to put a stand on it just to make sure. Obviously, it's not going to fall too far because of the other axle on there, but let's be on the safe side and put a stand on it just to be safe. And I'm going to go ahead and let the tension down just a little bit so it rests on that. Okay, good. Make sure if our jack does fail, we don't have a problem here. So now that we got a stand under there, let's see where we're at on our adjustment. They were pretty loose, and the other thing that I'm having a little bit of trouble with on yours is they actually have a self-adjuster arm on there. And so the self-adjuster arm was fighting me just a little bit and letting me get that on there. So basically what happens is on that star adjuster, there's a little finger that helps self-adjust that as time goes on. Well, that finger was in the way, so it wasn't allowing me to get that adjusted right. So we've got it adjusted, and I've got the finger put back on there where it's supposed to sit at. And as you can hear now, we're going to start with that. If we go much tighter, which I had, it was really grabbing. And so at that point, I would be a little worried about heat building up in there. We were probably about 12 to 14 rounds out from where you were. So we're going to start with that. You said you got another little small trip, so we're going to let you take that and try it, get them all adjusted up. And if we need to go just a little bit more, we will. But I want to start right there. That's a good stopping point for me. All right, so obviously got that done. Let's go ahead and get some grease through the spindle. And so as I'm doing this, Barrett, you'll see we know the seal's good. Everything was holding on the backside, and I've got everything cleaned out. So now we're looking at that race in there. And so I'm going to push grease in until I start seeing grease come through that bearing assembly. Okay, see how the grease is coming through now? We're going to stop. That's where I'm going to stop, because again, if you're greasing to that point, that grease has got to go somewhere. It's either going to pop through this rubber cover, or it's going through the seal. Too much grease can be a problem sometimes. So we're going to stop right there.
The person that's going to comment and say, I can't believe you didn't pack that by hand.
Well, remember, if this had been a brand new bearing, I would have packed it all the way back in. But we're using the same drums, we're using the same bearings, which we didn't see any damage to the drums, nor did we see any damage to the bearings. So there was already lots and lots of grease in there. And actually, if you look right close, if you want to take a picture of that right there, there's the grease coming through the bearing, just like if I had packed it. You can see it right there pushing through the race of the spindle. So now, obviously, if you spin it, look how that grease has gone all through those bearings. So there's no reason. I mean, if it had been brand new, we would have done that. But obviously, at that point, there's plenty of grease in there. Let's not get crazy. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put the wheel back on. Now, obviously, we're gonna have to do something different there, but I don't want to get any dirt in there. And I want to see what kind of lash I've got here, just to see what I got. I'm going to actually leave the center cap out of it for now, Barrett, because I want to, again, see what we got here. again, the purpose of this, Barrett, is just to make sure that I'm happy with the lash. Okay, see how, and you probably can't see on the video, but I've got just a little bit of play in that wheel. If I go and move this any further, it's either going to be way too tight or way too loose. And I've got just a little bit of play in that lash, so I know that the tension on that bearing pack is not too extreme. So I'm actually going to stop right there. I like that. So let me get a new cap to put on there. We'll go ahead and get the dust cap put back on, and I'm going to pull that wheel off so we don't get no debris in there. And then we're going to go ahead and put everything back together. All right, Mr. Barrett. So now that we got everything dust cover, wheel put back on, I know you said you had some comments, and you probably get some on this too, but I am going to go ahead and use an impact to put the wheels on, but that's just to get them seated in place. We always hand torque all aluminum rims to 120 foot-pounds. You will need to retest that after 100 miles to make sure that that torque is still the same, because aluminum rims have a problem of walking off. So I'm not tightening these down with this. I'm just getting them on there to make sure everything's good, and then we're going to go through and hand tighten everything. All right, set our old torque wrench at 120 pounds. All righty. All right, good to go.
Do not forget to hit that subscribe button.